New Orleans Saints cornerback Paulson, Adebo, and wide receiver Michael Thomas continue to manage their injuries. Should you be concerned, or is it all just precaution? We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we are free and available on all podcast apps and here on YouTube live today as well. I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today Saints Wire, Tuesdays a lot in the NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday. Appreciate you being here with us for another episode of Locked On Saints. As always, I try to think we're just going to do more and more now. We are live over on YouTube, so thank you if you are here watching, if you are listening or watching later, and especially thank you if this is your first time catching the show as well. I hope that you'll stick around. Locked On Saints is a daily podcast every Monday through Friday, bringing you at least one episode a weekday, getting you all in the know with everything you need to know around your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Quick shout out to everybody in the chat. Nick, I see you with the Your Team Every Day. Lakita, see you. Mickey, see you. Appreciate everybody for being here. Mikey saying that he watches every day. I believe you. And I watch you every... No, I'm just kidding. I appreciate you so much for being here with us for another episode of Locked On Saints. On today's episode, what I want to go through here is Paulson, Adebo, Michael Thomas dealing with some injuries right now. Is it something you should be concerned about, or is it just precautionary? And if the worst case scenario does happen and either of these players aren't available week one, what will the New Orleans Saints do? We'll break that down. And we'll also take a look at the adjustments and changes that have been made in terms of the New Orleans Saints practice squad. But we're not just going to run down the list for you. You know, we always try to keep it interesting here. So we'll talk about the guys that are locks. We'll talk about the guys that might actually see some playing time in 2022. And we'll also break down the player that was the biggest surprise to end up on the practice squad as well. A bit of a return or a surprise return this year in 2022. The next piece that we'll look at to wrap up the show is going to be updating you on the 53-man roster, because there have been some adjustments, and also what we saw during practice today. So let's start off with Paulson, Adebo, and Michael Thomas. Paulson, Adebo, New Orleans Saints cornerback, third round draft pick last year. Fantastic rookie season, is looking great so far throughout training camp and the offseason and preseason and all that. Going into his second year as the starting cornerback opposite Marshawn Lattimore, updated on his injury, as well as Dennis Allen also updating on his injury as well, that it is an ankle sprain. So again, not a soft tissue situation or anything like that, just kind of got rolled on like that, got rolled up a little bit, that kind of thing. He spoke about it during open locker room today with New Orleans media. Didn't seem to be that upset about it. Mentioned that he's kind of managing it day by day. So the way that sounds is that that's not a big deal. Doesn't sound like it's anything that's a continued issue for him. Now, we haven't seen him on the practice field. That could very well be or mean that particular injury for the New Orleans Saints or for Paulson, Adebo falls more under precaution than it falls under concerns. That's good news for the New Orleans Saints. On the other hand, Michael Thomas, we've gotten very little update on where he is, except for the fact that most people have kind of been told by sources that it's not a huge deal, the hamstring injury, but we also haven't seen him at practice for some time. Dennis Allen, mostly mum on it. We've asked him about it. He mentioned it on Monday, kind of saying like, look, I can't really update and don't really have much of an update for you in terms of where this is. There will be practice reports that start coming out next week. So starting on Wednesday or Tuesday, that's what you're really going to be looking for, is to see, is he limited in practice? Is he full in practice? All of that. And of course, we'll continue to bring you practice updates in terms of who is present during the open media availability. But remember, we only see 20 minutes of practice, right? There's a small viewing window for us in the media here. And so with that being the case, sometimes we don't see a player during the open viewing part, but that player still participates at some capacity in practice. So once we start getting those injury reports next week, things will become a little bit more clear. Until then, there's no obligation for any NFL team to say anything about any injury at all. And most of the time we only learn it because some source leaks or because, Dennis Allen is kind enough to throw a bone. And of course, there are also those times where we see players go to injured reserve, like with Malcolm Roach or expected with Malcolm Roach or Albert Huggins. And you just kind of know at that point because it pops up on the transaction wire. So with that being the case, there's not a lot really to update when it comes to Michael Thomas. And at this point, I'm not really that concerned about it. And now listen, I have mostly been unconcerned around the whole Michael Thomas injury conversation for the entirety of this offseason. So maybe I'm just a little bit more relaxed about it because I knew the way that this was going to play out throughout the entirety of training camp. He came out a lot earlier than we even expected. There's just not a lot that we kind of saw that was a big surprise in a negative way when it came to Michael Thomas. So as of right now, we're just able to believe what it is. That's the information that we're being given because so far, everything has been accurate thus far. So not really stressed out about it at this time. But let's entertain the quote-unquote worst case scenario. I'm not going to entertain the worst case scenario. I'm only going to entertain the worst case scenario. I'm not putting a T on that. But what happens if these two players aren't available week one? Let's just say that the New Orleans Saints end up in that position. How do they deal with it? The good news is that these two positions are not like they used to be in the past. Behind Paulson and Adebo, you've got Bradley Roby, who's got 6 interceptions so far during camp. Right now, I expect that he'll be the person that ends up playing in the slot, at least to open up the season. Dennis Allen with an interesting note on that on Wednesday, yes, today's Wednesday, discussing that it might be matchup based, the way that they actually deploy that nickel safety. So it's a little bit like what we talked about yesterday. Maybe PJ Williams gets involved with more of the physical receivers, but Bradley Roby gets involved with more of the quicker, shiftier receivers, while Justin Evans plays the sort of long and late downs who can rush the passer off the edge along with Tyrann Mathieu, which is kind of just like what we talked about earlier today. So there's ways for you to kind of deploy these corners in a way that you can also do something similar when it comes to Paulson and Adebo. The Saints love Alontae Taylor. You've got Bradley Roby, who has mad experience in the NFL. You've got Justin Evans, who you can plug in at the slot. You've got PJ Williams, you can plug in at the slot, which opens up 2 potential starters for you on the opposite side if Paulson and Adebo can't go week one. Although as of right now, it doesn't seem like that's the expectation. It seems like Paulson and Adebo should be ready to go by week one, just based upon what you have seen so far throughout. Just Paulson and Adebo's response today in open locker room. Quick shout out real quick. What if Alontae Taylor has a Paulson and Adebo type week one, and Adebo misses time? This is coming from our Locked On HBCU host, Darian Gray. Good to see you, homie. Appreciate you being here. It's an interesting thing, right? And wouldn't the New Orleans Saints love that, to have those two guys operating at that level? Now, let's be real. Any cornerback for the New Orleans Saints that they line up opposite Marshawn Lattimore week one has the potential to have a Paulson Adebo type week. Why? Because they're going up against the Atlanta Falcons. So anything is possible. The other piece there is Michael Thomas. What if Michael Thomas isn't ready to go at the beginning of the season while you've got Jarvis Landry, you've got Chris Olave, you've got a whole bunch more in terms of these wide receivers, Deontay Hardy and Marquez Callaway, who were starters for you last year. You have the pieces to cover for a week against a very, very weak secondary and a very, very weak Atlanta Falcons defense. Now, everything's weird when it comes to divisions, but with that being the case, if Michael Thomas, for any reason, isn't available week one, shouldn't be the end of the world in that specific matchup. You get worried if he's not available week two up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So that's definitely something to keep an eye out on. So no status updates in terms of participation, things like that until next week. So we'll have to see. But if worse comes to worse, again, I'm not putting the T on that just yet, the New Orleans Saints are going to be fine. They're deeper at both of those positions than they have been in a long time at the same time, which is huge for them. But as of right now, doesn't seem like there's any real reason to expect anything other than precaution over concern when it comes to Paulson Adebo and Michael Thomas. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at the practice squad and the surprise addition to the practice squad that nobody saw coming, as well as the guys that could actually see some playing time in 2022 as well. Maybe another reason not to be worried if Michael Thomas isn't able to go week one. The Saints, they got a lot of weapons, and it doesn't stop at the active roster. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Before we get to that, it is my great pleasure to tell you all about the Elias Game Plan app. This app is absolute fire. It's almost the start of the NFL season, and I love this time of year, and it gets even better when you get access to something like the Elias Game Plan app. Think about all those ESPN sports and info tweets that you see all the time that say per Elias Sports Solutions. This is what this is, digital solutions. This is where it all comes from now. It's in your pocket. It's not just exclusive for the folks that are writing and the folks that are podcasting and all that. It can be in your hands, which is huge for you from a fantasy perspective, even from a sports betting perspective to an extent as well. So there's a ton for you to check out. They are one of the most respected research team in industries in the industry, right? So you want to make sure that you check all of this out. It's that Elias Game Plan app. You're going to be able to look at things like checking out key injuries, for instance, biggest impact to the outcome of a game. All of that is available for you. The NFL season is right around the corner, so don't wait. Download the Elias Game Plan app today. And right now, I have a special offer for you. When you subscribe, you get a 14-day free trial on a month off of a monthly subscription, but only if you use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL, all one word, LOCKEDONNFL. Find the Elias Game Plan sports betting app in the App Store, Play Store today, and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, taking a look now at the practice squad for the New Orleans Saints. And there was a surprise addition, a bit of a reunion for the New Orleans Saints on the practice squad, a player that I didn't even realize was available on the market, if I'm being 100% honest. Over 860 players cut when it comes to those roster cuts, with teams trying to get down to 53. And former Ragin' Cajun, former New Orleans Saints defensive tackle Christian Ringo lands back with the New Orleans Saints. If you remember Christian Ringo, which I'm sure you do, he had some pretty nice moments with the New Orleans Saints over the course of the past couple of years, and a guy that I expected to make the active roster last year who did see some playing time. So the New Orleans Saints need some help along the defensive interior, and they have some players there, but they only kept 4 of them, right? When it comes to David Onyemata, Shai Tuttle, and then, of course, the new addition in Kentavious Street, and then Malcolm Roach, who's expected to go to injured reserve. Now, it's expected, according to Nick Underhill over at NewOrleans.football, that Malcolm Roach will be ready to return as soon as he is eligible, i.e. 4 weeks into the regular season or after the 4th week of the regular season. But at this point, you're going to need somebody else in there, part of that rotation. So does Christian Ringo not only a surprise addition to the practice squad, but maybe somebody whose time on the practice squad is short-lived? Could he end up on the active roster? Will the New Orleans Saints go for a bigger name like an Ndamukong Suh or somebody like that, like a Danny Shelton, for instance? So there's some real fun stuff to watch or Sheldon Richardson, rather, going on with the New Orleans Saints practice squad, and not something that you should just look at and say, oh, that's the practice squad. And that's it, right? These guys all have some real potential to see some opportunities there. Somebody in the chat telling me that Ringo wasn't good. Ringo made plays. And I'm not trying to beef him up or talk him up or anything like that. This is a rotational defensive interior guy. He's not going to be somebody that's going to be a starter for you. So I'm not trying to slander the guy or anything like that. The guy stood up in big moments, particularly in the run game. And that's what you want from the defensive interior. So, yeah, maybe he wasn't a sack producer. Maybe he wasn't a big pressure guy. But you know what? He's somebody that ended up standing in and playing the role that was necessary in the defensive interior. He knows the system. And he's somebody that the New Orleans Saints clearly like and trust, kind of on that Jalen Dalton level. So let's wait and see exactly what happens there. Now, if you get the opportunity to get Ndamukong Suh, I think that's the route that you go 100% of the time. So let's not throw the guy under the rug or under the bus right away before we've seen him play a snap off of the practice squad here. But a good signing for the New Orleans Saints because they need that depth on the interior. Didn't see how Roach got hurt, says Quinn Allen. It happened during the Los Angeles Chargers game on last Friday. I'm really not sure exactly what happened either. Again, you don't get practice, or injury participations and stuff like that, or what do you call it, like participation reports and stuff like that during the preseason. But, he ended up coming off the field, ended up going back out on the field as well and played through whatever the injury was. So at least that's good news. But it seems like he's going to be headed to injured reserve here soon. Sign me up for Suh. I'm right there with you. What about the guys that are going to see some playing time? One of my favorite additions to the New Orleans Saints practice squad this year was Taco Charlton, the veteran defensive end who had some really nice moments over the course of the preseason, had some really nice moments as well when it comes to training camp and practices. And so you've seen Taco Charlton make some plays for the New Orleans Saints, get involved, get some pressure, things like that. He was a guy that gave Trevor Penning a ton of trouble. He gave pretty much every tackle that he went up against on the Saints roster a ton of trouble. And so when it comes to all of that, the big piece to watch for Taco Charlton is the health of Marcus Davenport and then the continued health of Peyton Turner. Because if either one of those guys ends up with an injury or anything like that, then Taco Charlton is an easy elevation for you to get into the 2022 season. And to an extent as well, I wouldn't be super surprised if you don't even need an injury to get Taco Charlton elevated from the practice squad and on the field in 2022, because he can be that much of a matchup issue. And it's interesting because New Orleans Saints don't usually go for the speed rusher types, but Taco Charlton kind of fits that mold, but can bring you a little bit of power to speed conversion or speed to power conversion as well. Three other players that I think can easily see some playing time in 2022, elevated from the practice squad: Dejon Dixon, the New Orleans native, Nicholls State alum, wide receiver, absolutely could be somebody who gets there. And then also wide receiver Kirk Merritt, the Destrehan native, who showed you he can contribute from a bunch of different ways across the New Orleans Saints roster at wide receiver, running back, and even as a returner as well. So if you deal with another injury at wide receiver, if Michael Thomas isn't ready to go for that first week, which again, I don't expect that to be the case, but we'll certainly have to wait and see, you got two other wide receivers that you can elevate from the practice squad and end up making some plays. I mean, these guys are guys that looked good during the entire preseason, looked good during training camp as well. Now, I think that they end up sitting at the bottom of the rotation if you elevate them, but you still get the numbers that way. And it's not like the fourth and fifth or sixth wide receivers in this roster aren't going to see playing time, because they absolutely would. So if you get elevated and you're the fifth or sixth wide receiver on the depth chart, you might not get out there for, the first and 10, but throughout the game, you're going to be sprinkled out there, especially when you have guys like Dejon Dixon and Kirk Merritt who can provide some mismatch opportunities. The other one to watch is going to be linebacker Eric Wilson, who I expected to make the active roster. We'll have to see how things shuffle around with the active roster. We've already seen some shuffling. We'll highlight that a little bit later in today's show. But Eric Wilson, the veteran linebacker, absolutely somebody who can and probably should see some playing time, because they're a little thin at linebacker, only carrying 5 right now. The locks that were easy, you knew they were going to make the active roster, or that they were going to make the practice squad. Offensive lineman Josh Andrews, linebacker Chase Hansen, center Nick Martin. I love the addition of center Nick Martin, because it's good to have a natural center just in case you deal with an injury at that position, so that week to week you're not upsetting two different positions by having to move a right guard to center and then slide a new right guard in there. You might have to do that during the game, but if you've got Nick Martin available, he should be a quick and early elevation early on in the season. Linebacker Nephi Sewell ends up getting back to the practice squad, as well as wide receiver and return specialist Rashid Shaheed, who, if Deontay Hardy deals with any kind of injuries during 2022, Rashid Shaheed might get elevated and quickly put out there in terms of what he can provide as a return specialist. And then some of the guys that should be able to help you contribute for depth: defensive backs DeMarcus Fields, as well as Vincent Gray; tight end J.P. Holtz, as well as Lucas Krull; and then defensive tackle Jordan Jackson, the Saints' sixth round selection, not 6th overall selection. My bad. As we finish breaking down the practice squad there aren't just adjustments being made to the practice squad at this point. There are also still adjustments being made to the active roster. So let's get you caught up on the active roster, and I'll tell you what we saw at practice today for the New Orleans Saints, including the big return, and he's been there for a couple of days now, but good to see Pete Werner back out on the field. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. NOLA Gang 09, I will call you Joe. Before we get to that, I do want to tell you about just an important message. I love being able to talk about these things, because these are things that are near and dear to my heart. I kind of spoke about a personal experience a few days ago when recounting sort of that time around Katrina. If you're one of those people that thinks that it's okay to drive stoned, I ask you to please think again. You might ask yourself, well, what's the worst that could happen? I just drive under the speed limit or something like that. It's no big deal, right? Wrong, right? You really have the ability here to not only impact your life in terms of the way that you're able to live it moving forward and what you have to live with, but those types of decisions can impact somebody else as well. So stop kidding yourself. It's simply not okay to drive high. If you've been using marijuana or drugs of any form, please do not get behind the wheel. Make a better decision. Get somebody to drive you home. Get an Uber or a Lyft or whatever. Just plan ahead, or be willing to adjust come back and get your car the next day. If you feel different, you drive different. It's just that simple. So drive high, get a DUI. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a quick look at the adjustments and things like that that have been made to the New Orleans Saints active roster. But first, let me tell you about what I saw at practice today and one of the good things that came from today. You're going to hear a lot about the players that weren't available. No big surprises here. Traquan Smith, Michael Thomas, Trevor Penning wasn't out there. Paulson Adebo wasn't out there, but they did get to talk to him in open locker room today. You also have guys like Malcolm Roach and Albert Huggins who aren't present. You already know that both of those guys, one of which has already been moved to injured reserve. Malcolm Roach is expected to go to injured reserve. The new addition was Mark Ingram. I'm not super concerned about that right now, but it was a little bit kind of skinny at practice today at running back. We'll talk about that in a second. One of the things that I've loved that we have seen over the course of this week is that number 20, Pete Werner, has been present all week. That's good news for the New Orleans Saints. And Pete Werner spoke to the media after practice in open locker room, spoke a little bit about, he was asked if he was going to be 100%. He's like, I can't really put a number to it or anything like that, but he knows he wants to be out there week 1, and that's part of the goal. And he feels like he is comfortable with the progression that he has made. Same thing Paulson Adebo said about his ankle. They're happy with the progression that they have made so far in recovering from those injuries. And so far, when we have heard statements like that over the course of training camp and the preseason and all that, kind of reading between the lines, it tells you that they're feeling good for a reason, that they're not just like blowing smoke, right? They're in a situation here to where like they know how important it is to be out there for this team week 1. And Pete Werner is somebody that they expect to have a really, really good year and somebody that the New Orleans Saints really like and want to get out on the field. So I think he probably feels that urge as well. He knows this New Orleans Saints team believes in him, and Demario Davis believes in him, and he has the great advantage of lining up next to Demario Davis. You don't want to miss any of that time. So it's good to see that Pete Werner has been present for these last 3 days and has been participating. Again, next week we'll start to get the designations. Was it limited participation? Was it full participation? Was it no participation? Things like that. But at this point, the good news is he is there and he is present, and it seems that they're very happy with the recovery and the direction that he's going. If the New Orleans Saints aren't able to get him out on the field week 1, that's going to be really interesting because you only have, as of right now, and of course these things can change, 2 other backup linebackers there. You have your starters in Demario Davis, Pete Werner, and then Caden Ellis. Do you move Caden Ellis over to weak side? I don't know if you do that. Zach Bond's not going to be able to play the weak side for you. He's effectively a strong side guy. He hasn't really developed into the off-ball guy that the Saints had hoped. Caden Ellis has made major strides in terms of being an off-ball linebacker, but you love what he brings you as a pass rusher as well. And the only other linebacker on the roster as of right now is Andrew Dowell. Now, you have Eric Wilson on the practice squad. You could elevate him. He played next to Demario Davis for the majority of the preseason, but you also have undrafted free agent rookie Nephi Sewell, who I thought could potentially be the only undrafted free agent rookie to make the active roster, but that turned out to be Lewis Kidd on the offensive line. So shout out to the Montana State University alum. But the Saints do have the numbers down on the practice squad. Because of these new elevation rules, it's important to remember that you're not limited to just who you have on your active roster on game day. You can elevate some of these other guys to get them up there. So the Saints are in a pretty good position there in terms of what they might need to do at linebacker. But it sounds like Pete Werner is trending in the right direction and is trending upwards in terms of his ability to be out there on the field week 1. Now, active roster. Couple of adjustments have already been made. Dwayne Washington was released, though he expects to be back. This is going to happen a lot over the course of the next 48 to 72 hours of players kind of being moved on from, but then immediately brought back after they do some other roster shuffling and things like that. The other news is that Malcolm Roach is expected to go to injured reserve, and then the Saints picked up off of waivers Tanner Owen, former Missouri State University offensive tackle. So when it comes down to what you're looking for there in terms of the changes that have made, those are really the only big ones. And that's why running back was so kind of light today. The only 3 backs that were available were Alvin Kamara, Tony Jones Jr., and Adam Prentice. Mark Ingram wasn't present, and then Dwayne Washington wasn't present because he was released, but the expectation is that he'll be back to the active roster as they continue to shuffle and move players around. Dwayne Washington has been through this before. He knows how it goes. He knows the ropes, and so makes a lot of sense that it's Dwayne Washington as the guy that they're saying, okay, hang on, stay by your phone. We're going to call you. We're going to bring you back, but for right now, we gotta shuffle around these roster spots right quick, so just chill. chill. We got you. So the next piece that you're looking for is what is expected to happen next. And those are other players that could potentially be moved to injured reserve. Trevor Penning is absolutely one of those options. And then another one to keep an eye out on would be potentially Traquan Smith. A lot of people have asked me, how did Traquan Smith make the roster? He had a disappointing offseason. Remember that the New Orleans Saints love what it is that Traquan Smith does, but also he has to make the roster in order for them to put him on injured reserve if they want to maintain flexibility in terms of potentially bringing him back later on in the season. You've got Dejon Dixon on the practice squad. You've got Kirk Merritt on the practice squad. Unless somebody plans to sign them away on their active roster, you ain't got nothing to worry about there. So you have the wide receivers along with Rashid Shaheed. You got 3 of them on the practice squad. So let's wait and see where the New Orleans Saints go next. And I know that Michael Thomas also has been out of practice so far, but I don't know if injured reserve is going to be the route for him. Again, I'm not really concerned about him not being out there week 1 until we see what the injury reports actually look like next week. As of right now, we're working off of assumptions and speculation, and I ain't about that. All right, coming up tomorrow. I am not going to have a morning episode tomorrow, so this is going to kind of serve as the Wednesday night, Thursday morning episode. But Dylan Sanders and I are going to link up. Actually, you know what? I am going to do a morning episode tomorrow. I just changed my mind. I'm going to do a morning episode tomorrow because I want to talk to you. I want to get some of the questions in that you've had from the chat over the last little bit. I want to talk to you a bit about who's going to start at left tackle. We should break down where the New Orleans Saints are looking at a guy like Tanner Owen. Why is he all of a sudden on the roster? We can break that down and then much more. So we will have an episode tomorrow morning, probably around 9 a.m. Central Time. Probably not an evening episode Thursday, though, but Friday morning I'll have an episode for you. Dylan Sanders and I, who writes over at 24/7 Sports, covers LSU. We'll discuss a little bit about these LSU guys that are on the roster, Tyrann Mathieu, and then, of course, Jarvis Landry and what they're bringing this team. So excited to get more LSU expertise in to talk about those guys because I've only been able to talk about it from the excitement of the New Orleans Saints side. Let's hear it from the excitement of the Tigers side as well. So we got that coming up for you as we continue through the rest of the week here at Locked On Saints. I appreciate you, as always, for being here and for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out Locked On Fantasy Football, but don't forget to check out the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022 as well, wherever you get your podcasts on the Odyssey app or wherever else. And, of course, you can find the video versions over on the Locked On NFL YouTube page as well. I appreciate you, as always, for making Locked On Saints a part of your day and a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and this show. And, of course, as always, if you see me, say hi. I appreciate y'all for making me a part of everything that you've got going on, for everything that you need around or in between these episodes when it comes to your New Orleans Saints. Make sure that you are following along at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.